Great. Well, thanks for joining in today. My name is Richard Hodges. I'm the founder and program manager of ReTreeUS, a program that plants orchards in schools and provides support for school gardens. We also support community orchard projects and food forests with partner nonprofit organizations. So what we'll do is we'll run through a presentation here. And after we're done with the presentation, we'll open it up for questions, conversations, and it will be a lot of fun. So thanks for being a part of it. So again, yeah, ReTreeUS, this is our logo. Our phrase is that we're planting trees of fruit and seeds of thought. And it's kind of that latter piece, the seeds of thought, that we think has an opportunity to be particularly impactful beyond just the fruit that these orchards produce. And it's really the experiences that these students and community members have in the orchards. So hence the phrase, planting trees of fruit and seeds of thought. So our mission is that we're dedicated to promoting an environmentally sustainable, socially just food system through education, practical resources, and mentorship. So we do our Orchard in Schools program, as I mentioned, and support school gardens. And I'll just briefly mention our Back to School Garden program, that's the school garden support. And then, yeah, also community food forests. So first we'll talk about just a little bit about the benefits of school orchards. We will talk about some challenges as well later in the conversation. And so just to be clear, is everybody just seeing the presentation, or the other things that are popping up on my screen too?
Just the presentation.
Okay, great. All right. So many benefits to school orchards, and you know, the learning opportunities. Some kids really, we found, don't necessarily do well inside the classroom. So experiential learning opportunities outdoors is so important to provide, and really should be a part of every school in my mind. So we provide this opportunity by creating outdoor classrooms in the form of orchards. I mean, we've had countless times where teachers have kind of warned me like about students and saying, hey, like, if they give you any grief, I'll just take them inside. It's not a big deal. And I usually, now I know, those end up being like the best kid, most attentive in many instances. Those students who have been of concern end up being most engaged in digging holes and listening to what we're talking about. So just providing those opportunities is so important. Fresh fruit. The idea is that, you know, these orchards are anywhere from 12 even up to 50 fruit trees. And so the idea is to create a critical mass of fruit that can be incorporated into cafeterias, and overflow could be donated to local food pantries. And then, yeah, just also inspiration and providing ideas of potential career paths and real connection to the school, to the grounds, to the planet. So, and there are a lot of benefits, including beautification of school grounds. So this is our current reach. We are at technically 78, where I just rounded up there to 80 educational orchards. So in case anybody's counting each one, fact checking here. So yeah, we started in Maine as an organization. and have been planting orchards in schools and with partner organizations since 2012. And I've been working full-time on this program for over 5 years now, but early on just clipped off a few orchards at a time. Now we're found a pretty steady balance of 15 orchards per year that we're adding. So if you're interested in a school orchard, I'll give you information about how you could make that happen perhaps in 2024. If you're interested. So, or if you're not going to do it on your own, which I hope to provide some information if you want to voyage out on this adventure, just with your resources in your community. So yeah, and actually Stephen from Sage in Vermont is here, and so we've got one representative in Vermont school, the Shrewsbury Mountain School, which was a lot of fun to do last year. And then we've started doing more orchards in New Hampshire, and down there just have a connection with Cape Cod. So we're starting to start with Cape Cod and maybe expand to more urban areas in Massachusetts. Let's see. So our programming, one of our biggest pieces is our orchard caretakers. So as you can imagine, with 80 educational orchards and like the limited staff that we have, pretty much 2 staff, that we really rely heavily on volunteers. And so, on the application for our orchards that's on our website, we make very clear that, the orchard caretaker is the one in charge of ongoing maintenance, and that we will support that and will return for pruning workshops when possible. And, but really, and also grafting workshops. But really the onus is on the orchard caretakers for reading our orchard caretaker newsletters and making sure that the fruit trees are being cared for in the way they need to have success. So we want to set everybody up for success, and we've learned a lot over the 10 years that we've had planting school orchards, and we want to utilize that experience to help everybody be as successful as possible. So we've got one lesson that I'll mention again at the end of this presentation on our website. Actually, it's 2 lessons, but they're both related to pollination, that are aligned to standards. Also point out some resources for finding additional resources aligned to learning standards. But yeah, we're developing more lessons that incorporate the orchard, that are plug and play, so that you can have class time out of the classroom, and not be taking away from kind of milestones that as teachers have to reach. Got educational signage that we'll take a look at here. And then we also working on kind of gathering data from all the orchards that we're at. So each of our orchards has signage, and just generally, this is good information if you're thinking about kind of orchard on your own, educational orchard. A lot of what we do is pretty open source because we just feel like this is important. And so happy to share kind of these signs, this information with folks if they want. So, we really talk about with students why trees are so good for the planet and why they're good for us, including wildlife habitat, water retention, and water improvement, creating oxygen, absorbing carbon dioxide. So all these things, these signs give students and community members an opportunity to learn about the orchard, just walking through it anytime they want. So we also talk, Maine, we've changed the signs now that we're more regional to be apples in New England, and, talking about how actually apples originated in forests in Kazakhstan, and how they've kind of migrated, found their way here. So apples are great, and we grow a lot of apples. We also grow peaches, pears, both European and Asian, and some native plums. And yeah, love peaches. In most regions in the Northeast, we can grow them. So pollinators, how we couldn't be without bees, and kind of an activity associated with pollination and looking for bees, and kind of just that interconnectedness piece. So these are our signs, just a quick overview of them, and good jump off points for discussions. So just things to be thinking about if you are venturing into thinking about planting an orchard at your school or with your community or even at home. These trees need a lot of sun. Fruit trees need a lot of sunlight in order to produce. I was trying to let somebody in and I skipped ahead. So in order to be productive, they need a lot of sun exposure. So also soil is very important. And I'll talk more about our process how ReTreeUS approaches doing school and community orchards. And I'm going to talk about kind of our approach, and so that if you're interested in kind of pursuing school and community orchards with us, you can learn about it that way. But also it applies to if you're just thinking about doing it on your own, thinking about these approaches. So we'd like to do soil tests in the spring at our preliminary visits. And thinking about drainage of your soil, it's really important to have access to a hose. The first couple years are really important, getting trees established in the ground, and water is really important, especially in these last few years where we've kind of had intermittent drought. Proximity to the hose, and are you going to be able to get there once a week in the summer if it's drought weather to really give these trees a soak? Are there deer? That's a big thing that deer can really do a number on trees. They love apple trees, particularly the nice succulent branches. So these are all considerations that you need to have. So when we approach orchards, I already kind of mentioned like our application process, and that's on our website. I'll kind of overview our website once I'm done with this presentation, and then we'll open up, conversations, discussion. But in our spring visits, what we'll do is show up and measure out the orchard. We'll talk with students about all these considerations that I just mentioned, including microclimates, the types of fruit trees we want to grow, the arrangement of trees we want to grow in order to get pollination or to keep the European pears, if they get really tall, from shading out the other trees. And so maybe plant the European pears on the north side. All these considerations happen on our spring visit. The other important thing is, so we start by flagging out where we want the trees. And then since these images of the flags is actually at a city park in Lewiston, Maine, and we did 50 trees there, but you need to get all the proper permissions. So flags are helpful to get, for a visual for dig safe and facilities, maintenance, anybody who needs to weigh in on there being trees there indefinitely, hopefully over 100 years for some of these trees. So get that approval, and then typically I'll leave bags of compost, 1 bag per tree, per flag, per tree. And the school usually has good access to cardboard. So then once there's approval for all these flag locations, laying down cardboard at the flag location with laying compost on top of that. And then we return in the fall to plant. So that's the spring prep. Over the summer, we're cultivating our trees organically in our nursery. You can see these little irrigation lines. And so, meanwhile, at the school sites, the cardboard is breaking down. It's breaking down any sod, any weeds, any grass that's at the site, and really kind of bringing up organic matter. And there's great teaching extensions that we'll get into just in the simple process of cardboard and compost. And that's my favorite way to garden, sheet mulching, lasagna gardening. I'd rather just put cardboard on it and or paper and compost or mulch and have it build soil rather than pulling up weeds or anything. So that's something that we found to be really helpful in the preparation. And then so we'll return, and this is the fun part when you actually get to plant the trees in the fall. So now we plant all our trees in September and October, and we drive around, or I drive around this fruit tree mobile with the trailer full of trees. I can fit nearly 50 7-gallon pot trees in there. So for bigger projects, I've had to get creative in how to get trees to where they need to be. But we plant, the reason why we plant in September, October now is it's like planting garlic, if you're familiar. So, you plant that before the ground freezes, and the roots are actually starting to spread out. And with these fruit trees, particularly, the roots keep growing even after the leaves drop. And then winter comes, snow, and it just really takes a huge piece of really watering these trees in, because just really getting the soil around a tree to be incorporated with the native soil is a very important process. And so we use winter and spring thaw to our advantage. So that's why we've shifted from spring planting just bare root trees, so kind of dormant trees with just no soil. We've kind of evolved the program to have potted trees in the fall, and that makes a big difference. And if you're interested in expanding your own growing at home, the other benefit of this approach is that garden centers and so on, they'll put big sales on at the end of the season to liquidate their inventory. So you can actually have the benefits of planting in the fall while also maybe spending less money on your fruit trees. There's a lot to be considered how you source your trees. There's a reason why we've kind of shifted to our own nursery. It just gives us more control over our varieties of trees. It gives us control over what applications, it's all organic soil, and we use holistic sprays that help the tree and deter pests. And so those are considerations when you're buying trees from a nurseries. And also being root bound. So these are only growing from spring through till the fall. So the roots have time to get settled in the pots, but don't get really tied up and bound by their pots. So that's the planting day. That's the fun time. And when we do smaller schools, we're able to rotate pretty much all the students of a smaller school, class by class, to be a part of the planting. We'll start with, say it's an elementary school, we'll start with the 5th graders digging more. And then by the end of the day, we're planting the last couple trees with kindergartners without as much digging. So planting day is so fun. But yeah, the idea of fruit trees can be great. Actual practice is challenging. So it's good to be jumping into things, fully aware of the potential challenges and be ready for them. And if you're ready for them, you can handle them. If you kind of have the approach of, just going luck with them and their trees, they'll grow. Sometimes they will, but sometimes they won't. So pests and university extension is great for providing information if you see pests and how to handle it. One challenge is that we noticed early on with school orchards is lack of investment. So, we've really evolved our application process to really be about investing time, and we'd love to evolve a way to create stipends for orchard caretakers, but we're not there yet. Relying on volunteer time is hard, and so we're trying to provide experience through our educational resources and through our support, but it really takes a lot of gumption and effort to make orchard really thrive. So we send out to all our orchard caretakers these newsletters, and so that we'll send them seasonally as they're relevant. So this is an example of an orchard caretaker newsletter, because now, if there's ever like even a thought that deer are going to be in the orchard, we'll fence the trees when we plant them. We used to be like, well, just let us, if it was obvious there were going to be a problem, we'd do it. But if there was like uncertainty, just say, okay, we'll see if they're munching, and then we'll do it after. It's much better to do it in advance. We've had to replant trees because of them just getting mauled by deer. So if you are trying to work retroactively, or if you're planting your orchard at home, this is a good system for putting up deer fencing. We actually have changed our method since putting out this newsletter, and I use just one metal post now. Grade stakes don't last that long. But yeah, you can sign up for orchard caretakers, whether you're a school orchard caretaker or whether you're just interested in learning about that. And so there's a sign up on our website. Here's another example of what's in our orchard caretaker newsletter. I also like it here because this is a really important step. Part of the annual maintenance of orchards in our approach, until they get huge and they don't need this, is to every year lay down cardboard and mulch. And that it keeps building up organic matter. It keeps weeds from growing around the base of the tree, and it keeps weed whackers at bay. So can't emphasize, it's a good way to reuse resources with cardboard. And I know schools and their cafeterias go through a lot of cardboard. So I find myself talking a lot about cardboard and wood chips, but they're great resources and tree-based. Again, another reminder about watering and how important it is, and how you really need to soak your trees. You don't want to just water on the surface and leave. You really need to revisit the trees multiple times to make sure that the water is really penetrating all the way down through to the roots. And so I choose these three examples because they're some of the most relevant. And then lastly, I would say to anybody growing fruit trees at home or in a community setting, to make sure you're covering your bases. So putting rodent protection around your trees is so important, and probably the biggest oversight that a lot of home orchards have is not protecting from voles. And so in the Northeast, voles come underneath the snow and they'll just girdle the trees or eat enough of the cambium of the tree to just cause the tree to be so stifled that it just kind of limps along. But if they go all the way around, your tree is toast. So those are all important things to be considering about. And so those are our orchard caretaker newsletters. And then lastly, just want to plug again that school orchards are outdoor classrooms. So there are resources that are aligned to learning standards that you can use in the orchard or in your garden. So I put in this resource, ag classroom retrieus.org/matrix. That'll take you to a database that you could search any topic that you're interested in teaching in the garden, and there'll be lessons that if there's a keyword that you want to plug in, there will be lessons that will populate for that, and you can find out if they're within whatever grade range that you're working. So we've started dabbling into the realm of creating lessons, and we started that a few years ago with a specific grant for that purpose, and we focused on pollination. So on our website, that I'll just dive into briefly before we open up conversation, is they're right there. You can download the PowerPoint presentation. It's really plug and play. So we've created standard aligned pollination lessons, but also right now we're working on, no guarantee of when I'm going to publish these, but decomposition. This is something we talked about with boxes, cardboard decomposing throughout the summer, because when you come back in the fall, after you lay down your cardboard and compost, there's hardly any cardboard box left. So it's a great jumping off point for talking about the FBI, and not the Federal Bureau of Investigations, but fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates. And so decomposition is just a very great topic, a lot of ways to explore it. And also there's ways that building organic matter through decomposition, and there's studies now about how organic matter in soils is related to carbon sequestration, and maybe building organic matters in our soils is one of the best ways we can fight climate change. So all great things to think about. Also working on soil, basic soil lesson called the Power of Carbon, focusing on pH and why that's so important. So in the spring we do soil tests and send those out to the University Extension, get them back. There's a lot of information, but we're kind of just focusing in on pH primarily, because you may have all the nitrogen in the soil, but if the pH is way off, the trees won't be able to take that in. So focusing narrowly on soil science so that it can be accessible and impactful. And then just a more broad lesson about all these pieces of how trees and fruit trees can help mitigate climate change and help solve some of the issues that we're facing on an ongoing basis. So that is that. Oh boy. So what I'm going to do is open up some questions, and then after I do that, I want to just do a quick exploration of our website, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, feel free to, just ask a question, or if you'd rather type a question in the chat, well, either way. I have a question, Richard, around, orchards. You've been doing this a while, and I know some of the first school orchards started in Maine. Are they still going? Are they still?
Oh yeah, I'd say that 95%. Yeah. As I mentioned, we've learned a lot along the way, including what I was alluding to about deer. So we still include them in that 78/80 number, but because we planted them, they're planted. But yeah, no, there are two that come to mind that I know aren't there. And so that was part of the learning. But no, I would say, most of them, some of them are really starting to produce a lot of fruit now. Particularly peaches are some of the earliest to fruit. So we've had a lot of peach harvests throughout our schools, and apples and pears are really starting to come in.
Mm-hmm. And is the fruit like going into the school cafeterias for the most part, or?
Yep. Yeah. So it kind of varies from school to school. But yeah, I mean, and it also varies. Peaches are a little tricky because, in some places in Maine, and depending on the season, they're ripe, like right when students return in September. And sometimes, it's like a little more August. So those are the one fruit that's kind of been tricky for dispersal. But yeah, just was talking to somebody yesterday talking about how they had enough pairs to kind of go through the whole school. So and that's one thing that we're working on, kind of collecting that data, and just because that's impactful if we're able to get a lot of that going. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm wondering what you think about like the poly deer fencing that would go around an entire orchard space versus individual trees, and if you found that to be effective.
Yeah, so I think that they both have merits, and we typically do the individual ones because that's what like we have the capacity for. But it has shortcomings, a lot of them. And so you have to do the cardboard mulch every season. You have to remove the cages every year and put it back. We've made it so it's like doesn't take long, but like there are, it's welded wire fencing that we're using so that it can, it's something that we maybe would have the orchard caretaker do, or, older students that are really well versed in like, hey, like there's natural consequences and you got to wear gloves. And so that's part of the shortcomings, and also that you have to really cultivate your trees kind of more upward when you're doing the enclosed fence, the individual fencing. So ideally, enclosing your whole orchard is best, but you have to be ready to maintain the edge, the perimeter, figure out how grass and weeds are going to be managed within that space.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if all those things are checked off, then the whole space is great, because then you can really start planting around the trees, and it gives a better feeling to the space too.
Mhm. And like I'm looking at 6 and 7 foot netting, like poly fencing to go up. Is that adequate, you think?
It should be. I mean, technically, the deer can jump over 6 feet. It's unlikely, I think. I mean, you could maybe put some like just some ribbon, or anything tied up along the top, just as another visual, if you're doing 6 foot. It does make a difference of how hard it is to install 6 foot versus 7 foot. Like I think 6 foot would probably be a lot easier, and the fencing that we put in actually we're doing like 5 foot for just the cages.
Okay.
But yeah, it's pretty unlikely. They would have to be pretty hungry to jump over or something like that.
Thank you.
Do you see a question from Kira in the chat, Richard?
Yeah. So here's a question: general estimate of caretakers' time commitment. Yeah, it does differ on the number of trees, but I would say it also is seasonal. So there's a big burst, I would say, to facilitate and ideally incorporate students in every spring, laying down cardboard and mulch. And so right there, if depending on how you do it and how many trees you have and what age students you have and all that, that could be anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, even longer if you wanted to really make it longer. And then there's just seasonal. So like on average, I would say, you know, like 2 hours a month. But that also varies too, because depending on your watering system and how many trees you have, and how easy it is to pull out your hose, like ideally, in the summer, you might not have to water for a couple of months, because if we get an inch of rain in a week, you don't need to water. But recently we've been having drought, and so it can take longer to water. Sometimes it takes a full hour to water 12 trees, because you really need to soak them and go to each one and pull out the hose and all that stuff. So it's a really long, circuitous answer to your question. But I would say generally, um, an hour a week, 4 hours a month. Okay, so question about varieties, and older heirloom varieties, originating before modern chemical sprays and fare better than newer varieties without spraying. How do you pick varieties? So that's a good question. So, again, back to kind of that nursery setup and why we're doing that, and choosing our varieties. Yeah, it is true that a lot of the kind of more heirloom varieties, we plant a lot of. There's one that I love that was discovered in Oxford County, Maine, called Black Oxford, which is like kind of a purple black tie-dye apple that's like a winter apple, that tends to fare pretty well with pest pressure. And so that's an older apple, but also Honeycrisp, which is a newer invention, that has good pest and disease resistance too. So we do both. We'll do both the heirlooms. It's just you can learn about them, about what's most pest and disease resistant, and then kind of go from there. And so that's kind of our thinking a lot with the apples. And then also pollination is something to consider. Had a lot of success where the climate allows to grow Asian pears. Asian pears tend to be, they're kind of like, they market them at the store, if you're not familiar, as like apple pears, but they're like kind of more crisp. You can eat them right off the tree, like juicy pears, but they're round. And those tend to have less pest and disease issues, but we have found some cold hardiness issues with some of the Asian pears. So it depends where you are. And then European pear varieties, there's a lot to consider. Kind of picked some, including one called Stacyville pear, which originated in northern Maine, in Stacyville, Maine, near Katahdin. And that's a great pear that has a good story. And so, there's a lot of considerations and varieties, and we don't really plant plums other than native plums, just because they do have some resistance to like black knot, which is really just so prevalent in forests because of the black cherries in the forest that just tend to get covered in black knot. It's a fungus, and that a lot of times, that more often than not, I've found those spill into the orchard. So beach plum and American plum are great. They're smaller plums. And then peaches, we've got like 4 varieties that are cold hardy for the Northeast that we like to plant. So Reliance, Red Haven, Madison, and there's one called Lars Anderson, which was kind of developed in Maine. So those are kind of the varieties considerations. Awesome. Yeah, great questions. And so feel free to ask another question. Just wanted to just quickly point out, some final things for that I mentioned through the presentation that's on our website. So this is just ReTreeUS. And there are learning resources, orchard caretaker resources, and then you can apply for the orchards. Also, you can subscribe to the orchard caretaker newsletter that I mentioned by just clicking this link on our website. And just, say if you wanted to apply for an orchard, you can do that here. We also have a back to school garden program that kind of works on aligning school gardens with the school calendar. And so it's really focused on fall and mulching over the summer. And so that's a whole other can of worms, if you will, but really working with farms to grow fall vegetable seedlings that we'll distribute to schools. So that's something else you can learn about here. And then if you wanted to apply for the orchard or sign up for the orchard caretaker newsletter. And then again, the learning resources that I mentioned. We've got our pollination lessons here, and then additional resources. So was there another question that popped up here? Okay, so this is just the, one of the pollination lessons, and you can download the presentation that makes it really easy to kind of talk about pollination in the orchard and go out into the orchard and see real-time pollination. So that's just a brief overview of some of the resources.
Any
But
other
yeah.
questions?
Great. Well, also feel free to send any lingering questions through email. My email is richard@ReTreeUS.org. And, we can probably send that in the follow-up email too that goes out. And yeah, just appreciate people's interest in doing these things that'll benefit their school and their community. And I'm happy to help facilitate in ways that that you can make that happen on your own or through our programs.
Great. So I guess we'll wrap up if there's no final questions. So we did record this and it will be available on the New Hampshire Farm to School website, as well as the New Hampshire School and Youth Garden website for future viewing if you missed any information. And of course, Richard's website, ReTreeUS.org, for most of the information. So one question that came up earlier, Richard, is if you could share the PowerPoint. I mean, we have the recording, but I don't know if you want to share the PowerPoint. We can send it out to everybody too, if you want to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be getting a follow-up email from New Hampshire Farm to School with link to the recording and the slide presentation that Richard showed. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you at another upcoming webinar this winter. Take care.